It's a place to talk about history, talk about science with Enzo, dig into the great unknown. Just come say hello, have some fun. It's the Karen Show.
Hello, everyone. Just a heads up. This is Taylor, obviously. Heads up. I seem to be having a little bit of a problem with my internet. It's driving me crackers. So if chat can do me a favor, if at any time it looks like I'm glitching or I'm speaking, you can hear me, but I'm frozen. Can you let me know? And anyway, that's that. Here's Taylor. Hope the intro played properly because I'm not overly sure. Hello to Derek from Southern California. Southern California. I hope you're in Southern California. Are they away from the fires in Southern California?
Yeah,
I get very confused. Yeah, because it's not fun there at the moment. My heart's breaking. I keep seeing not only footage of people escaping, humans can escape, but I'm looking at footage of horses shut in paddocks or in fields or whatever you call them in America, and then poor dogs wandering the streets, wondering where everyone is. It's more the animals I'm worried about, but there you go. Oh, thank goodness, Derek. Well, that's good. That's good. Well, Taylor and I will chat for a little few minutes and give people time to pop in if they're going to pop in. And then we're going to get started to talk about history. And yes. Primarily today, obviously, Lucius Beebe. Hi, Kevin. Hello. Yes, Kevin Rodriguez. Is that how you say it? Rodriguez. There you go. Yeah, so we're hoping everything goes all right, that our internet connections behave themselves. No glitching, and we'll see how we go. But as you guys know, and Kevin and Derek probably more so, Taylor's really very good with her historical research and everything she does there, and that's where Taylor and I guess, kindred spirits. I love my history and I love researching it, and I love how it can, if you really get into it, it can kind of help you step back in time to a place where perhaps you would much rather have been back in the day. I know with Taylor, I think I know where she'd like to be if she had a time machine, and I'd probably join her. We were having that discussion the other day, weren't we, Taylor? And I said how we'd have to probably hold each other back from interacting with the past because we might mess it all up. No, don't do that, baby. Don't do that. Yeah, it'd be terrible. But there you go. Yeah. So today, obviously, Taylor's going to chat about Lucius, and I've been, as some of you may know, or all of you may know, I have been to Virginia City many times, and I intend to be back. Just have to save the pennies to save up for the airfare. But I've gone past Lucius Beebe's house there because it's right next door to my friend Connie, who owns the Silver Queen. So I've stayed at Connie's. And I've stayed in the Lucius Beebe room, actually. That was where I stayed.
Oh, that's a great
Yeah. So, and I could obviously, so I've seen the house from the outside, unlike Taylor, who has had the opportunity to be inside Lucius Beebe's house. But what a beautiful house. What a beautiful house. Yeah.
Gorgeous.
So,
it's in great repair today still. It's just as beautiful as when Beebe and Clegg had it, if not more so. The people who own it are Beebe and Clegg fans, and so they pay really good tribute and homage and take really good care of it. It's a beautiful house.
Maybe one day they'll with your company they might let me have a little walk in through the doors where T-Bone probably lived too. Yeah, I'd like to meet them because they're lucky to have that. Yeah, they're so lucky to have that house, and it's and that's the thing with Virginia City. There's more to Virginia City than ghosts and demons. Or Virginia City really, if you look more at the history of Virginia City and the many people that came out of the city that added to the world really with their inventions and tons and tons of people. And we'll finally one day, because I hope that Taylor will do this on a regular basis with me. It'd be really good. It'd be really fun. She doesn't have to do it every week because she's a busy lady. But when she does, we can talk about all sorts. But Lucius is your love, really, isn't he, Taylor?
Oh, I love that man and his partner Charles Clegg and their dogs T-Bone Towsers 1 and 2 with a huge passion. Anyone who's ever talked to me in person, I find a way to weasel in Beebe and Clegg reference or a fun fact at any opportunity. I'm sure you in the chat have been on the receiving end of that a time or two. But he's just so fascinating because he was part of so many different aspects of culture that it's hard for me to not think of him, because he had his hand in almost a little bit of everything throughout his life. It's just really fascinating.
Oh, he is. Well, before we get started, everybody, me and my little shorts and videos and things. Our lovely Enzo, wherever he is, I wonder where Enzo is. He'll probably watch later. But Enzo has got his Enzo the Science Guy theme song. So I thought it only fitting, and I hope it plays because I'm having trouble here, but I thought it only fitting that Taylor had an intro for her before, because if she's on, she has to have an intro. So let me know what you think, everybody. Here goes Taylor's intro.
It's time for history with Taylor. She's bright, smart, and has a heart for everything that's old. Her journalistic style is rare, a lady with a real flair for getting to the truth. So come on in, join us now for a chat about who, what, when, and how. It's history time with Taylor. Yes, it's history time with Taylor.
I love that. Thank you so much for making that.
Oh, there we go. It's done. It finished. I wasn't sure if it had finished or not. There we go. So, yes, that's just for Taylor. So now Taylor can speak all things Lucius. Oh, thanks, Dee. Thanks, Dee. So, yes, this is time for Taylor to talk and introduce you to Mr. Lucius Beebe and Clegg and T-Bone 1 and 2. T-Bone obviously is my favourite because he's a beautiful,
with good reason. He was a good dog. He was a good boy. Yes. Yeah. So Lucius Beebe. Who the heck is Lucius Beebe, right? Again, like I said earlier, if you've ever talked to me in person, you have to have at least heard of Lucius Beebe. But even if you have, even if you are familiar with Beebe, you're still going to learn something interesting about him tonight. There's way more to Lucius Beebe than we can cover in, an hour and a half. It's something I've been studying for 5 or 6 years now. And I still don't know everything. I'm still learning something new all the time about him. There's just that much that he did. And he was a prolific writer. He wrote over 40 books. Some of them were written on his own. Some were written in conjunction with his life partner, Charles Clegg. He was a journalist, so he wrote not only weekly syndicated columns that were syndicated in newspapers across the United States, but he also wrote interviews and interviewed famous people and wrote articles outside of that column. So he was just at that keyboard constantly. So there's a lot of information about him out there. And he was actually quite a major celebrity. He was on the cover of Life magazine, for example, in 1939. And the reason why I mention that is I'd like to share with you how I first heard about Lucius Beebe, because Karen mentioned, now Lucius Beebe lived in Virginia City, Nevada, and next door there's a house that's called the Cobb Mansion, and it's a bed and breakfast. And as Karen mentioned, she's stayed there and knows the wonderful owner, Connie Carlson, who actually knew Beebe when she was a child. And one day I was just walking through the Cobb Mansion. Connie was giving me a tour of each of the rooms, and it's this beautiful Victorian I think it was built the same year as Beebe's house, which was 1876. I could be mistaken, but it's an 1870s beautiful 3-story mansion. And each of the rooms has a theme for a different person or phenomenon in Virginia City's history. So there's a Julia Bulette room, who was our Comstock courtesan, a very famous lady of the evening, and that's a very beautiful, lush, red velvet boudoir style bedroom. And then there's the hop sing room. That's a Bonanza, the television show reference. And then there's a Beebe and Clegg room. And so we walk upstairs. She goes, okay, and then this is the Beebe and Clegg room. And I go, what's a Beebe Clegg? And Connie looks at me and she goes, Taylor, really? And I go, what? She goes, you've been to Virginia City, because I live in Virginia City now, but at the time I did not, but I was coming to visit very frequently. At first it was once every other year, and then once a year, and then like once every 4 months, and then every couple months. So it got faster and faster intervals of visiting toward the end there, that I finally said, well, forget about it. I'll just move there. Just easier that way. But she goes, you've been coming to Virginia City this long. You know so much about the history. Oh yeah, thanks for pulling up the Cobb Mansion there. So yeah, the Beebe Clegg room.
I'm just looking for it. I've slept in that room.
Yeah. So me too. So what's really neat is she goes, how do you not know who Lucius Beebe and Charles Clegg are? I go, I don't know. And she goes, well, okay. And you can see right there in that picture, there's a framed photo on the wall there. That framed photo on the wall is Lucius's cover on Life magazine. And I've got, in my presentation, I've got a bigger one, so we can see it in a minute. But
I had it up.
Oh, perfect. So I saw that picture framed on the wall, and I go, well, this guy must be important. So it just, and I look at it and I'm like, that's kind of a dignified dude.
Wow.
Who is that? So it just got me kind of intrigued. And the reason why they call that the Beebe Clegg room is that's the only room that you can rent for the evening where the window faces Lucius Beebe and Charles Clegg's house. So through that window that we saw in that room, you actually look in Beebe and Clegg's former side yard. Yeah. It's a beautiful, lush garden. The current owners are always out there tending their garden. It's gorgeous. So beautiful view. So anyway, I didn't end up staying there that night, but when I went back home, I opened my bedroom door, and my dresser was right as soon as you walked in my bedroom at that time. And on the top of my dresser, I had my favorite Virginia City books lined up. And the first thing I saw on the far end was a Lucius Beebe book. And I go, oh, that's the guy that Connie was talking about. And so I picked it up and I go, yeah, I've read this. This was a good book, but I just didn't remember like the author's name or really know that there was anything interesting about him. So I just started researching a little bit more and more. And the more I found out, like, my mind was blown with each new fact, because he's just, no way that, one person did all that, knew all those people, started that, was the inspiration for this. That can't be. So anyway, we're going to learn about that. But that's sort of how I got sucked into the Lucius Beebe world. Karen, how did you ever hear about Lucius for the first time? Was it through me?
You, yeah, and then from you, and then I thought, oh, okay, and then because I stayed in the Lucius Beebe room, and it wasn't until I spoke to you after I've slept in it. So I've slept in the room, and I did look out the window because I had a window to look at, and I saw the house next door, and I thought, oh, isn't that a pretty house? And I thought, I wonder who lives there. And then, yeah, it was you that I was speaking to, and you talked about Lucius Beebe, and I can't remember why he came up in the conversation. Oh, maybe because I said to you I stayed at the Cobb Mansion. I can't remember because we've talked about so much. And then you talked about him and told me things, and I was like, oh, really? Wow, I had no idea. Now I have a big idea about just how influential he was in Virginia City, and how later, in part because of him and some others, but because of him, Hollywood came to town, so to speak, and because he had his finger in the Hollywood pie in different ways. And yeah, just, and looking at him and looking at the photos and knowing what he did and all the things he did, it was like you said, how can one man have done so much in his lifetime?
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I just think it's great. Oh, Brandon, I just have to say thank you to Brandon, who just gave me a super sticker. Brandon, I haven't seen you in ages. I have to catch up with everybody. Brandon is with oh, that's my dog snoring, not me. Brandon is with another channel. He pops into other people's channels of Nerd Report, and he's lately been on Popcorn Planet as well. So good on you. Thank you, Brandon, and hello to Carla. Welcome in. We're talking about Lucius Beebe, and I've got that picture. I know you've got it in your presentation, but I'll just show people who Lucius is because I found the picture. That's Lucius, and I don't know if I can get it any bigger than that because, well, I should be able to, but I'm on the, hang on, maybe if I do that. Here we go.
There he is.
That's Lucius. Yes. Yep. And apparently, I don't know, I was watching something else on Lucius, and they said that he got his picture on the front of Life magazine mainly because of who he was, but how he dressed. People were always fascinated with how well he dressed. So there you go.
Yes, fashion will be a big part.
Okay?
Yes, fashion will be a big part of what we discussed today because it was a big part of his life. But yes, he was a fashion icon. And so, yeah, let me try and go ahead and start the presentation here. So let's see here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen.
Yeah, and we're working out bugs here, people. So Taylor's got she's put together a pretty good presentation. Yes, I can see it and I can add it. And let's that.
There he is.
Oh. And now you've got to make yours bigger. There he is.
Yes. Okay. So Lucius Beebe.
He really he didn't live too long, did he? That's terrible.
Yeah. I wish he was still alive today. He'd be 120 something, but he packed
anyway,
a lot.
I'll zip it now. And if anybody else does happen to give me a super sticker or anything like that while Taylor's presenting, I shall shout you out when she is finished. I don't want to interrupt the flow. All right, let's go.
Okay, and Karen, I don't think I can I can see the chat. So if there are any questions as I'm presenting, feel free to just shout them out to me.
I'll keep it. Yeah, I'll interrupt you if I see one, Taylor. Okay.
Alrighty. So here he is. So he's standing right there. That's his Rolls Royce that he's standing in front of, by the way. I don't actually know how many Rolls Royces he owned. I have been trying to find out, but I have verified at least 5, but I think there's more. He would tend to get a new Rolls Royce every few years, seems to be the pattern. And then he's holding there the Territorial Enterprise. That's the newspaper that he owned in Virginia City, Nevada in the 1950s. So we'll get more into the Territorial Enterprise in a bit, but that's him standing out in front, out in around Virginia City. And I believe this photo was taken by Elliot Erwitt, who was a rather, but there was a similar one also taken by Jerome Zerbe, but I believe this one's an Elliot Erwitt photo. He was a very well-respected photojournalist who actually just passed recently, rest in peace, but he took some pretty incredible and iconic photos. So look up Elliot if you don't know him. But yeah, Beebe was photographed and painted and by several amazing artists throughout his life, because he was a celebrity himself. Even though his name is somewhat forgotten or lost to history today, he really was a household name in his day, from the 30s to his death in the 60s. Okay, Lucius Beebe. So as I touched on a little earlier, it's impossible for me to not think of a Lucius Beebe reference almost always, because he just had his hand in, or was influential in, so many subjects. He's most well known now. If anyone does know him or remember him, it's through his work as a reporter and author about trains. He's huge. He's still kind of a legendary name in the rail fan vintage train world, because he wrote so many books on the subject. He wrote over 40 books about many subjects, but trains were the bulk, and certainly some of the best sellers of what he wrote about. And he was really one of the first to write commercial train books in the 1930s. So he really pioneered that genre. And he also took incredible photos of railroads and trains that no longer exist now, but he was able to capture them sort of in their sunset years. And so I think it's a really beautiful thing that the people that remember him best and most to this day are his rail fans. When he did the same thing for the railroads, they were fast becoming forgotten at that time as planes and personal automobiles became more popular. Lucius was really there championing trains and the beauty and the romance of the steam engine and that whole culture. And I think it's really beautiful that rail fans today are kind of doing the same for him. But he was also no less important or influential in the world of fine dining. He was definitely an early day foodie, as we would call it today, but certainly at an elevated level. If he was seen eating, dining, writing about your restaurant, you had it made. He was the Instagram influencer of the food world in the 30s for sure. Also high fashion, as we touched on a little bit. Ever since at least college, he was being written about for his fashion sense. He always seemed to dress much like myself, maybe not today, but often I dress 40 to 100 years out of date. And Beebe was doing that back in the 30s. Fine drinks. He was part of many fine wine societies. He wrote about different high society nightclubs and their different cocktails. He even wrote a book for the Stork Club, and that's called the Stork Club Bar Book, and it's a compendium of the legendary Stork Club nightclub in New York City's cocktails. And that book is interesting. It's credited with having the first recipe of the Bloody Mary ever printed. So that's kind of a fun fact. He also was a reporter. This is really where he first rose to at least national, if not international fame, was his writings about cafe society in New York City in the 1930s. And then in a little later in life, he became an authority and author on Old West history, and that's when he moved to Virginia City, wrote many books about Virginia City, Nevada, but also San Francisco's Old West history, wrote about Wells Fargo, wrote about different mining regions of Colorado. So he became an authority on the Old West later in life, and so we'll go over all that in more detail. But first, since Karen likes to start her presentations with a jaunty tune, I think this would be a good time to start with Mr. Beebe's own jaunty tune theme song. So this is a song from a movie of 1944 called Carolina Blues. It was a film by, or rather, featuring Kay Kaiser and his band. He was a popular big band leader of the day. He and his band have a series of misadventures throughout the movie, and in the middle of it here is Carolina Blues, is this wonderful song and dance number. And the tap dancers you see here are the Nicholas brothers, two of, if not the most, one of the most famous tap dancers ever. And they are just fantastic. And you'll see them, you'll see why here in just a second. And pause it here. It goes on for another 2 minutes on this version. There's another version that's like 7 minutes long. So if you want to see it, Karen's dropped a link in the chat there after this is over. You're welcome to watch the full version. But that just kind of shows you how
he was popular.
You know, not everyone got that full Hollywood song and dance treatment, you know, in the day here. So now I got to figure out how to get out of it. All right, we'll restart it. There we go. Okay. So Lucius Beebe himself obviously was popular, as we said, and he was a celebrity in his own right, but he had close friendships and associations with really interesting people as well, right? Like attracts like. He was a contemporary and acquainted with Cole Porter, the very famous songwriter, one of my favorite musicians ever. You know, you name an American classic song, and oh, I'm drawing a blank. This is so bad because he's Virginia City. Irving Berlin. If Irving Berlin didn't write it, Cole Porter probably did. You know? Yeah. So Cole Porter actually included Lucius Beebe in some of his early lyrics in some of his songs too, which is kind of fun. He also Beebe worked with Cecil B. DeMille on DeMille's picture Union Pacific, and DeMille would visit Beebe on his private rail car. Beebe had his own private train caboose that he would hitch on the back of trains, and he would never travel by plane. He would always travel by train, and so he had his own private car. And Cecil B. DeMille would ride on that with him, and they maintained a friendship for much of their life after working on that film together in the 30s. Evelyn Walsh McLean, who we see photographed here with Lucius, she was the last private owner of the Hope Diamond. And actually, I'm not sure if I can zoom in, but you can see she's actually wearing the Hope Diamond. I don't know if the cursor shows up for you guys on your screen. There we go. She's actually wearing, I believe,
the cursor's on her dress. Oh yeah,
right. The necklace there.
And here I was thinking Lucius was looking at her.
No, he's looking at her eyes. And a great story about that. So he actually did wear the Hope Diamond. She would let him wear it. They were dear friends. He would go over to her beautiful palatial estate in DC called Friendship. That was the name of her estate. And he would go and go for her parties. She was known as this legendary party thrower. And Lucius's last book, called The Big Spenders, he actually writes about what he called his friend. He called her Evie. So he writes about Evie and her amazing party. And I think there's a good photo of what her party setup would look like. It's just amazing. But he actually, she changed his life and completely. They had a dear friendship for several years, but it was in the early 1940s that he went to a fateful party, and there was another fellow guest there. Rumor has it that guest was there as the guest of J. Edgar Hoover, the director of the FBI at the time. But so yeah. But anyway, there was this guest there, and Evelyn introduced Lucius while Lucius was wearing the Hope Diamond, mind you, introduced this guest to Lucius, and the guest looked at him and was just sort of awestruck and sort of perplexed. Who is getting to wear the Hope Diamond? You know, who is this gentleman? And he writes about it later really beautifully. But that guest was Charles Clegg. So that's where they first met. And Lucius,
that's how they met.
yeah, at Evelyn's party. And it's a great story. Chuck tells it beautifully in this book here, Lucius Beebe Reader. Chuck Clegg wrote the introduction as Lucius's lifelong partner. He wrote the introduction to this wonderful collection of Beebe's articles and short stories. But so he writes about that there, and you can read that, and I suggest you do because it's a fabulous story. But the quick version of it is after that introduction, then Chuck goes out on the town with the party that he came with, and then comes back to stay the night in one of her, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of bedrooms. And it just so happened that, as fate would happen, that they had rooms right next to each other, separated only by a bathroom. They shared a bathroom. And Chuck went in to freshen up for the evening. And what did he find but Lucius Beebe passed out in the bathtub, covered in blood, clutching a broken china pig.
Oh, God.
And so, Chuck opens the door, finds this bloody mess of Lucius. And apparently, Chuck also writes that the night before, rumor has it that Lucius spent the night not in his bedroom, but outside, sleeping coiled up underneath one of the stone lions out on the lawn. So anyway, Chuck turned on the water, woke him up, cleaned him up, gave him a stern lecture of how one ought to conduct themselves at a proper lady's, home as a house guest, and got him ushered into bed and put to bed safely. And then Chuck himself retired for the evening, lit up a cigarette, fell asleep smoking the cigarette. It fell on the floor and it almost burned down that wing of the house. They didn't get elected. They realized they were meant for each other. And Chuck says that they were invited back as guests, but never as overnight guests ever again. So anyway, Lucius also, yeah, that's a good one. Lucius also was a dear friend of James Beard, actually the famous celebrity chef, to receive a Michelin star or a James Beard Award is the highest honor that you can get as a restaurateur. And Lucius actually helped James Beard with get his first job as a chef in New York, and then also organized a publicity tour to go to James Beard's new restaurant to get hype about it. And James Beard actually was wanting to be an actor, and that's where Lucius had met him first, because Lucius was a reporter writing on the New York theater scene as well at the time. So that's where they first met. But then when James switched careers, Lucius was instrumental in helping get that started for him. Tallulah Bankhead was a dear friend of both Lucius and Chuck. There's some pictures of their house that you can find with a signed, autographed picture of Tallulah Bankhead, the famous actress, inscribed to them. She was also the inspiration for Cruella de Vil in 101 Dalmatians. Herb Caen, the legendary. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Was Tallulah the one? There was a play that Lucius went and watched all the time. It wasn't in Pipers, obviously, but there was an actress. Was it Tallulah that was in a stage show that he used to frequent?
I know that.
I'll have to look it up.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that one specifically. But I know he was, at the opening night of every major Broadway production, from throughout the 1930s at least.
Because I'll look it up.
You might be talking about
because I was looking at other stuff.
Yeah, look it up.
It was a famous actress. Yeah, I'll let you know. I'll shut up now, and I'll look for it while you're talking.
No problem. Yeah, we just got a little bit of a delay between us, so when you're stopping, it sounds like you're stopping, but you're not. But anyway, no, please do. Please let me know. So Herb Caen, legendary, especially if you ever lived in the Bay Area. Herb Caen, legendary San Francisco Chronicle reporter. was a dear friend and wrote about Lucius often in very humorous ways in his columns, and came to visit Beebe in Virginia City quite a bit. Fun story about Beebe and Herb Caen. One time they took a dirigible ride from San Francisco down southwards on California toward San Simeon, California, which is about midway through the state, and rode this dirigible over Hearst Castle, William Randolph Hearst's estate, legendary, beautiful estate. And Hearst owned the rival newspapers to not only Lucius's, the paper he was working for at the time, the New York Herald Tribune, but also owned the rival paper to Herb Caen's San Francisco Chronicle. And so he wasn't very well liked by either of them. And Lucius saw fit to instruct the entire dinner party on this dirigible to push out all of their dishes and their scraps from dinner on the lawn of Hearst Castle. So they got into some trouble together throughout the year. Jerome Zerby was Lucius's first famous partner. He dated Jerome for several years in the early 1930s, up until about the time that he met Clegg. Jerome was known as the inventor of, Beebe calls it candid photography, which is more what we would call paparazzi photography today, but it had a different tone. He wasn't a TMZ, photographer. The difference between today's paparazzi and Jerome Zerby is Jerome was actually invited to these celebrity parties, and they loved him very much and let their guard down and allowed him to take these really cool candid photos. So they were definitely a hot it couple in the 1930s. Lucius would write about high society and all the fun and going on in New York City nightlife, and Jerome would photograph it. So they were this pretty great power couple. Graham Hardy is another one of his contemporaries, not necessarily a household name unless you're a rail fan. And if you're into railroads, Graham Hardy's name is legend. He did just a huge amount, just as Lucius did, to keep the engine going, as it were, on popular railroad history and the rail fan scene, just as Lucius did. And Graham actually lived here in Virginia City and nearby Silver City, which is just a mile or two away from Virginia City. And so they were close collaborators. Graham Hardy published a lot of Lucius Beebe's books about Virginia City. So we can't talk about Lucius without talking about Charles Clegg. And of course, we can't talk about any subject without bringing up the Animals on Karen show, as it should be, Mr. Hauser. So Lucius was sort of, it seems to me that Lucius was a black sheep of his family. He came from a very wealthy Boston Brahmin sort of Massachusetts family. But because of some of the anecdotes I've already shared, and I'm sure his sexual orientation, he wasn't quite as accepted as maybe some of his other siblings were to his family. But he created this wonderful new family with Chuck. They had a lifetime of love. They basically, the way that both of them tell it, practically from the day they met, literally until the day that Lucius passed away, they were inseparable. Charles says that they were partners in every sense of that word. They were partners in life, in venture, in love, in business, and really just couple goals, as the kids say. And their dog T-Bone Towser was like their son. Again, ahead of their time a little bit. Today we talk about dog parents and pet parents and dog mom and all that. These guys lived for their dog. He went everywhere. And I don't know this for sure, but I get the sense that they bought a whole entire private railroad train car just so that they could travel with their dog and not have to worry about hotels saying no dogs allowed. They installed special
Well,
doors on
there were pictures. Sorry, I'm remembering the delay. There were pictures of T-Bone in the train cars with them. So I think that's probably
absolutely
not just a rumor, but correct. Yeah.
Yeah, they had special doors installed. So instead of a regular door, you know, you turn a knob or whatever. Oh, someone's getting jealous because I'm talking about another dog. Leica just came here.
Luca?
I'm talking
Leica.
Yeah. I'm talking to Auntie Karen, yeah. So yeah, doors that you know, kind of like you would have at a restaurant into the kitchen where it just swings on hinges, just so that T-Bone could come and go as he throughout the car. Yeah. Speaking of coming and going,
that's a great name.
You gotta open the door for Leica here. Hold on. I gotta get that in my house. Yep.
Taylor has 3 beautiful puppies, all of whom I adore and love, and have slept on a couch with all 3.
Yes.
They're my favorite American dogs.
Oh, and they love you so much too. Auntie Karen, yes. Yeah, that was impressive that all 4 of you were on that little couch.
Yes, it wasn't a little couch, but
that's a lot of dogs.
I'll just say I was super skinny then, but I wasn't. I just backed right up to the back of the couch, and from memory, Leica was at my feet. Luke was in the middle near my belly, and I'm trying to think. Yeah, no, actually, I think they were nearly all at the bottom because I had the pillow up the top, and I was just squished there. I just didn't move. I think it was your beautiful father, John, who came in the morning and got them all off and made me a cup of tea.
Oh, bless his heart.
Yeah.
So
anyway, where were we with Lucius?
Back to Beebe. This is a baby picture of Lucius. He was born 1902, December 9th in Wakefield, Massachusetts. He grew up on what they call the Beebe family farm, but it was more of a vanity farm, more than an agricultural farm. But this beautiful estate that is still there to this day. And private residence, you can't go visit it, but it is still there. And they were a very influential family, especially in Wakefield, but also in the greater Boston area. His grandfather, he was named after his grandfather, also named Lucius Beebe, and Lucius the Elder owned several businesses, but one of them being a leather company, and he made saddles for the army in the Civil War. He also made leather shoes, things like that. So they established their fortune because of Lucius Beebe Sr., Lucius's grandfather. There's a library in Wakefield, Massachusetts called the Lucius Beebe Memorial Library that's named after Lucius's grandfather, although they do steward Lucius Morris Beebe, our Beebe, legacy as well as the rest of the families. He was the youngest child of 4, so his eldest brother, he never had the opportunity to meet. His name was Junius Merrick Beebe, but he only lived to be about 1 year old. He was born in 1891, died in 92. Then his eldest sister, his only sister, Lucia Beebe, was born, and then Junius Oliver Beebe, and then our boy Beebe, as Beebe called himself, boy Beebe. Lucius was born in 1902. So he had an interesting child. Before we get into his college years, he had an interesting childhood. He was definitely the mischievous sort. He writes about becoming friends with a man as a child who was a dynamiting expert and sort of picked up dynamiting as a hobby and thought it was great fun.
As a kid?
We're talking single digit. He says exactly how old he is, I forget, but something along the lines of 7 or 8. he thought it was great fun, a great pastime. You know, some kids pick up cow tipping or peeing houses, right, Mom? If you're still watching. But yeah, no, Beebe decided to go one better and stick dynamite in local people's outhouses and explode outhouses. That was great fun for him. He got expelled from, I believe it was 3 of his preparatory schools. So he did go to public school for a short time, then went to very prestigious preparatory schools, but didn't spend too much time at any of them. He got expelled at least 3 times, I believe, for different things. The last one of them involved the dynamite. I'm a little rusty on that, but the latest one toward the end of high school was for drinking. Not only was he underage, but I believe it was during Prohibition, so it was kind of a double whammy. But he still ended up getting to be accepted at Yale University in the early 1920s. So Yale was, you know, if your kid got into Yale, you're going to be excited, right? You're going to be proud. Not so much with Beebe's family, because they were a staunch Harvard family. Beebe's grandfather was a professor at Harvard. His older brother, Junius, had gone to Harvard and with honors and, you know, flying colors. So the fact that Lucius picked Yale, I think, was intentional. I think it was just another antagonistic, beating to his own drum sort of decision. But anyway, he did well at Yale for a time. During his time at Yale, he published his first book. I don't have a copy of his first book, but I have his second book. He was studying at Yale to become a poet, actually. And so he was studying fine art poetry. So Corydon here is his second book of poetry, and it's beautiful. And actually, a dear friend gave this to me. You know who you are. Thank you. This is actually signed by Beebe. And if you collect Lucius Beebe things, you'll notice his signature looks a lot different here. But this is because this is very early. I mean, he's probably 21, 22 at this time. So anyway, this is a very proud thing. And yeah, this is 1924. So he was still at Yale at the time that he put this one out. He went on the Yale Record. So that's the newspaper. So he wrote for that. But it was Prohibition. So knowing what we know about Beebe, he sort of ignored Prohibition. And there's a legend that goes that for many years throughout the 1920s and even into the 30s and 40s, people who went to Yale didn't know that Lucius Beebe was a real person. They thought it was just the password to get into speakeasies. So that gives you an idea of what extracurricular activities were like. So Yale had this tradition, not even tradition. I mean, it is a tradition, but a rule that if you attended Yale, you had to go to chapel. I believe it was every Wednesday, but at least once a week. You had to go to chapel. So it's what they called compulsory chapel. So you had to go to church at least once a week, and it was mandated. Now, Lucius, being Lucius, he would be out all night the night before mandatory chapel. He would take the train to New York. From New Haven, he would take the train to New York. He'd be out in his full regalia, top hat, tails and all, and would come back just in time. If he made it back, he would come back just in time. He wouldn't be able to go home and change into, normal clothes. But what's normal clothes for Beebe? No, he'd still be wearing his night out clothes from the night before, and then roll into chapel with his top hat, white gloves, cane, the whole bit. But he was very against it. It was a rule. You had to go. You'd get expelled if you didn't after a certain amount of time. But Beebe was very much against it, and that'll come up a little later here, but that's worth noting. Another influence that Beebe made on Yale was he is said to have introduced the +4s, the fashion of +4s, to Yale. What's +4s? Well, if you take a look at this photo here, the voluminous trousers that the gentleman is wearing on the left there with the Argyle socks, those are +4s. You see similar styles on golfers or
Looks
old
like
timers.
yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's now a pretty, when you think of Ivy League fashion, if you were to watch a movie of it in the 20s and 30s, you'd think kind of like that. That's a pretty iconic look, right?
Yeah.
The only thing more iconic would be maybe a woolen V-neck sweater with a tie or something with those +4s, right? And a big microphone, cheering microphone, right? But no, that was apparently Beebe that introduced that. He started wearing those first, and then people started copying him.
Wow.
Yeah, and Beebe sort of had his own makeshift speakeasy in his dorm. He also had he was also said to have had a again during Prohibition, mind you, right? So, but he had full bar set up, so that's where a lot of people would hang out. He also was said to have had a roulette wheel in his dorm. So yeah, I think he had fun at Yale. He ended up getting expelled though. He was supposed to graduate with the class of 20. Well, first was supposed to graduate with the class of 25. Got bumped to the class of 26. So, but then he was expelled from Yale. And the story varies depending on who tells it, but basically he went to a play at Yale, and he was dressed. He was on the balcony on the second level, and he was dressed like the dean of the Yale Divinity School. So he was wearing a big robe and took empty liquor bottles and chucked them on the stage and broke them and yelled out, "I am Professor Tweedy, head of Yale Divinity School," and what he said from then on varies from account to account. But anyway, they didn't take too kind to that. He had also been a bit of a troublemaker before that. That was sort of the last straw, and so he was excused from Yale.
He was really naughty.
A little bit. See, Mom, I wasn't so bad comparatively.
No. Yeah.
Angel. I only got expelled once. Maybe got expelled twice. So,
I never got expelled. I was a sucker. I loved my teachers.
You still are a good girl.
Oh.
So,
I try.
So, Fallen Stars was Beebe's first book, so we kind of went past that, but that's a beautiful poem. I'd like to read just a quick passage. This was Beebe's first book, and he published when he was 18 years old. Just incredible. I'm just going to read a quick passage from Fallen Stars here. "I dare not yet pronounce my sudden joy, since misery may tread upon delight, and passion may serve as a decoy to lure the soul into the troubled night of dull despair, and yet is manifest within me an unprecedented grace, emotional, desirous, unexpressed, longing for some unknown, divine embrace. Thus many passions, like a rising sea, concentred in my soul, that I might cast my hope on things undreamed of and above the level of our frail mortality, have swept across the barriers of the past and whispered warnings of an unfelt love."
Aww.
Yeah, so just beautiful poetic soul, and I just share that with you not only because this is Lucius's poetry sort of ignored, but it followed him throughout his career. If you read his works now, he takes the same spirit of poetry and he puts it into what he writes about. You can call him a lot of things, but dispassionate is not one that you can ascribe to Beebe. He is so passionate, and a lot of that romance and the romantic language and that poetry that we see here from his time at Yale and Harvard flows into his railroad writing, his writing about Virginia City, his writing about anything he's passionate about. So I thought that was neat to share here. So I don't have a slide on Harvard. I know we're going a little long here, so I'm going to kind of pick it up a little bit. But there, like I said, there's just so much here about Beebe. You can't do it all in one bit. His time at Harvard.
Talk about him again.
Yeah. Part 2, part 3. Beebe took 1 year off after getting dismissed from Yale. And he took up a job with the Boston Transcript, a newspaper in Boston, and decided to write mostly about Harvard and the collegiate beat. But instead of writing about, football scores or, good teachers or exemplary students, he kind of wrote mostly campus gossip. And the heads of Yale were pulling their hair out every time he published an article, because it always made them look, it always portrayed Harvard in an unfavorable light. And so the legend goes that finally they said, hey, if you quit the newspaper, we'll get you can attend Harvard. Well, like, come attend Harvard, but the condition is quit writing for the transcript. So I don't know if that's the case. Wow. Family also did have deep connections to Harvard, so there may have been something going on there, but that seemed to be the bribe to get him to stop writing, airing Harvard's dirty campus laundry. So he did accept the offer, and he did enroll at Harvard, and he did graduate as an undergrad. So he did get his degree finally through Harvard. Then he enrolled in a graduate school, and that's where he got in trouble. He became the protege of Edward Arlington Robinson, the poet, who most famously wrote Richard Cory. It was a song made famous once again by Simon and Garfunkel. You may have heard that version if you haven't read Richard Cory, the poem itself. So Edward Arlington Robinson was at Harvard, and Lucius became a very close protege of him and studied under him, and actually wrote 2 books of his own on Edward Arlington Robinson. But he got a hold of a few of Edward Arlington's poems, and I believe they were unpublished. And Lucius took it upon himself to just go ahead and publish them without Robinson's permission. So kind of a little copyright infringement there. And before it got... What's that?
I said these things happen. Sometimes
you daisy.
Just accidentally.
I know, I think he knew what he was doing. But one student, before it did end up getting published, but before it happened, a fellow student alerted Professor Robinson about this, and Lucius heard who snitched, basically, and took it upon himself to administer some Harvard Yard justice and beat the kid pretty bad. I know he had to go to the hospital. So yeah, Lucius got expelled for that. Another double whammy there. So
he really was naughty.
really naughty. So you can imagine when he went back home after getting expelled for the second time, now from the Beebe family's precious Harvard, that he describes it as home was not a very nice place to be at that time. Not a very welcome place to be. His father almost wouldn't speak to him at dinner, type of thing. And so he figured he better figure something out pretty quick. So he cooled his heels a little bit at home, but shortly thereafter, he went and got a job at the New York Herald Tribune. And so moved to New York, and started as a beat reporter, writing about, different current events. There's a famous story of, Lucius showing up to report on a fire that he saw fit to show up to report in full, sort of what you see here, full morning attire, top hat and fine suit and tie and gloves and the whole bit, and opera cape, I believe. Anyway, it sort of looked a little odd to the people he was interviewing, but he did this often. So they figured, you know what, you might be better in theater. Why don't you go do theater reviews? So then he was able to wear the attire of which he was accustomed and fit in quite nicely there, made a good name for himself as a theatrical critic. But a little after that, after covering Broadway, he then began a column, This New York, and this is really what sprung Beebe from mild local infamy around Harvard, Yale, and New York to the world stage. The column This New York was sort of a gossip column, if you will, but writing about just the who's who and who's doing what and who's doing who in New York City nightlife in the 1930s. So you had famous actors and singers and musicians, and he even wrote about different royalty all coming to New York and having a good time and what it was like. And so this paper got syndicated throughout the country. So whether you were in Lincoln, Nebraska or Fresno, California, you were up on and felt like you were vicariously there rubbing elbows sort of with this glitterati of New York City nightlife. And so Beebe became really a big figure of that. Walter Winchell was a contemporary of his, and they were actually sort of bitter enemies, but they sort of did the same thing. And they would often throw barbs at each other and sort of have different pissing wars in their article. Walter Winchell wrote about Lucius and gave him the nickname that still sticks to this day, called Luscious Lucius.
Luscious Lucius.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
Yeah, that was on a couple levels, yeah. So here he is. Cafe Society was the name for that New York City nightlife scene. And Beebe actually sold the rights to Hollywood for the name Cafe Society. So there was a film starring Fred McMurray, who you see on the left here.
I was just going to say that's Fred McMurray.
Yeah.
With Hedda Hopper. I know who Hedda Hopper is. See,
that's not Hedda Hopper. That's not. I think that's that Madeline Carroll. I forget her name. I think it's Madeline Carroll. Okay. In the middle, but he was a friend of Hedda Hopper, and I think I put her in here. No, I didn't. Anyway, there's a good picture of Lucius and Hedda Hopper at the Easter parade in New York City. So he was a dear friend of Hedda Hopper, and she wrote about him in his column as well. Yeah, she did very similar style reporting as Lucius did in the This New York column. So yeah, definitely a contemporary.
Hedda Hopper. Hedda Hopper, and I can't remember the other lady's name. It was Hedda Hopper, the one with the dark hair. I'm trying to remember. One of them had dark hair. One of the lady gossip columnists was blonde, and one had dark hair. But yeah, Hedda Hopper, you didn't want to get on the wrong side of her.
No, you didn't. Lucius was on the right side. Every time she wrote about him was very, very favorable. But you're right, you didn't. Yeah, Hedda Hopper is. If there's any old Hollywood film buffs, you already probably know who Hedda Hopper is. But she plays herself at the end of Sunset Boulevard after the big climax scene. I don't want ruin it for anybody, but she's the one who calls in the gossip of what had happened, and she actually plays herself. But yeah, she always had those beautiful big fabulous hats. Enzo says I have lots of hats, but not nearly as much as Hedda Hopper.
Hedda Hopper, yeah.
Sorry,
so I interrupted again.
What's that?
I interrupted again. Go.
Oh, no. And you can feel free to pull the start playing the music or pull the hook anytime if we need to do this in a couple of let me know. So not only was he this, now he's become this national celebrity, this sort of arbiter of taste and this mouthpiece for high society in New York City. But a few years afterwards, he starts writing high iron, high liners, trains in transition. These are all his earliest train books. And so he started writing about trains. He had this lifelong passion of trains and railroad history and steam engines, and just sort of the whole allure of that, grand American tradition, as he calls it. And so he started writing these books. High Iron was the first one that he came out with. And prior to this, it said that there were no other books like it about trains. Now, train books are many and plentiful, but at the time, it was very uncommon to have a book on trains for an adult audience, or a public audience. It was essentially, you had books on trains for children, or you had books on trains in a technical sense, but there wasn't like a book for popular consumption on trains. So it said that he really invented that book genre. And you can also see here, each of these covers, he took the photographs of each of those. So he basically self-taught in photography. He learned it. And when you're taking pictures of something you love, you tend to take a good picture. So he really put his passion into this new art form. And you can see there, that picture, there's him on some railroad tracks. He's holding one of his cameras there. Also wearing what looks to be something like +4s. So like we saw from his time at Yale. Now, here he is. Here's that Life magazine cover that we talked about earlier. And you'll see, sorry, I put my notes here without my year, but he was named the best dressed man in America a few years in a row, definitely in the 1930s. But the National Tailor Society voted and named him the best dressed man in America several years running. And I mean, look at him. Hard to top that. He would often go to London, often at least one time a year, and get his suits custom made or bespoke at Henry Poole on Savile Row, which is the premier fashion destination in the world, especially for men's tailoring. So he would have everything made to measure, as he liked to point out. He also was profiled in the New Yorker right around this time. So this Life magazine cover came out in 1939, but he was profiled in a two-part. Again, too much to talk about in just one part. And the New Yorker felt that as well. So they did a two-part series on him called The Diamond Gardenia in the late 1930s. I believe that was 37. And that was by Wolcott Gibbs. And Mr. Gibbs profiled him, but called it the Diamond Gardenia because of an incident that happened. So as we mentioned earlier, Lucius was in one of the front rows at nearly every major Broadway opening and Broadway show in the 1930s. And at one of those such openings, he wore what you see here, this brooch, this diamond encrusted gardenia. And
it's very pretty.
Yeah, beautiful. And it was made by Marcus off of Fifth Avenue in New York. And Marcus loaned it to Beebe to wear, because as we pointed out before, if he was eating at your restaurant or, wrote about you, you had it made. So if he's wearing one of your pieces, it's going to get mentioned and have a little bit of fanfare to it. Well, they got a little more fanfare than they bargained for that night. Beebe was wearing the brooch, I assume. I don't know. There is a picture, an illustration of it, but I don't know exactly where he was wearing it, but probably on his lapel, just as he is wearing a nice boutonniere there. And during intermission of the show, he's doing what we all expect him to do. He is refreshing his beverage, and he is speaking to a young lady, speaking to probably several people, one lady young lady in specific, and then goes back to have his seat, and he realizes his brooch is missing. And this is on loan, and it's how many diamonds on it? I don't know, but you can take a look there. A lot. He was supposed to give it back after this showing, and it's gone. So there was a few days where New York City's finest were looking high and low for it. It ended up being found on the personage of the woman that he was speaking to at the bar during intermission. I think her side of the story is it fell in her bag. It must have just fell off. It was loose. But I don't know if anyone bought that story. So anyway, it caused quite a stir and fanfare, and Marcus definitely got their name in the papers because of that. So it did work, but just not quite in the way they expected. So that's why the New Yorker called their profile the Diamond Gardenia. But it goes into a lot of very interesting aspects of Beebe's life up until that point in the late 30s. So I do recommend reading that if you're interested. So interstage is Charles Clegg. We mentioned him earlier, but at this point in his life is where Charles Clegg enters Beebe's life. And here's a nice picture of the two of them when they're rather younger. Forget about this part here. That is just a placeholder for some text, but this is just a wonderful photo of Beebe and Clegg out on the town enjoying a nightclub. Shortly after they met, we spoke about how they met earlier, but they were essentially inseparable. You see Chuck is there in his navy blues. So this must be during the time he was enlisted in the Navy during World War II. There's a great story about how the two of them were in their apartment the night or the day that they heard about Pearl Harbor. They were listening to the radio and they heard the broadcast, and Chuck immediately stands up and puts on his coat and says, "Are the enlistment offices open on Sundays?" He was ready to enlist and serve his country immediately after hearing about Pearl Harbor, and he did. He enlisted the following day, and so he served in the Navy, and it really broke Lucius's heart to be away from Chuck for that long. But anytime he was stationed in San Francisco, Lucius made the trip out to San Francisco to go and be with him. So he was able to see him a little bit during the service years. And Chuck was released prior to the end of the war and came home a little early. So they were reunited after not too long, but probably too long for both of their liking. And they were really inseparable ever since after that. But this is just a wonderful photo. And I think this picture was taken by Jerome Zerby, as you may recall, Lucius Beebe's prior partner, who was the photographer. So it's a really nice portrait of the two of them. So Chuck comes back from the war. There's not much about between 1943 when he was discharged up until 47. There's a couple of things, but essentially 1947 is when their history really picks up again. 1947 is when they published their first book ever written together. And it's, of course, about trains. And it's considered by many as the best B.B. Clegg train book. It's called Mixed Train Daily. I agree. It is a fabulous, if you had to pick one B.B. Clegg train book, as hard as that would be, that's the one I would recommend. You can just tell they're in love. It's fresh. They're out doing this passion project together, and they're traveling the country, documenting these quickly vanishing American railroads, and they do a beautiful job. Chuck himself was a wonderful railroad photographer in his own right, as was Lucius. And so the two of them combined was just a powerhouse, to say the least. But Mixed Train Daily was fantastic. So they initially started traveling around the country, documenting these railroads in a car. But toward the end of their research, they got their first of 2 private rail cars. So their first one was the Gold Coast, which you see them enjoying the back of right here. And this car does still exist. You could see it at the California State Railroad Museum in Sacramento, California. And actually,
Is that the one that there's a photo of you standing out in front of?
What's that?
Is that the one that? Is that the one with you? A photo of you went to visit it? I'm sure I saw you standing, or were you standing in front of the Virginia City one? Where is it?
No, I've never seen Virginia City. No, I haven't yet. No, it was definitely the Gold Coast. That's the one at the museum.
Yeah, there's a photo somewhere.
Yeah. And the first time I saw that, I cried. It was like seeing an old friend. I actually have a video of it. The hair on my arm was standing up and I had goosebumps. Like, it was just like seeing an old friend. And I went and I gave like the side of it a hug, which is kind of awkward, but if you're into trains, you'll understand. You make it work. But yeah, I went and I like gave the car like a hug. You can't go in it because it has the original furnishings from the 1940s in it. So it's too fragile to regular traffic. But they put, if you see the side here, they put along the side of it like a riser, so a ramp, so you can peek in each of the windows.
I have to ask you, is that a dog on the back? Is that a T-bone, or is that, it doesn't look like a T-bone.
Where? Let's see.
But it has to be a T-bone.
Yeah, T-bone was here. T-bone probably likely never went on the Gold Coast. He was on the Virginia City.
Yeah, it looks like
T-bone until later.
Sort of dog. But that's
Where,
a dog. I've got an iPhone. It has to be a dog.
Where though?
You can see its tail. Its tail seems to be sticking out there near Clegg's chair. And then you can see its little nose and mouth and eyes. So there you go.
Yeah, it kind of looks like a little lion. But I see a little smile right there.
Yeah. I can see it. See?
Interesting. I don't know. That's a good question.
There you are.
But it couldn't be T-bone because he came a little later. But anyway, so 1947, they published Mixed Train Daily. But during the course of that research, they come to Virginia City. Now, Beebe first visited Virginia City in 1940 by himself. He was part of a press junket that was invited by the Hollywood studio that made a movie called Virginia City. It was starring Errol Flynn, Humphrey Bogart, and I think it was it Randolph Scott as well. Anyway, and so they organized this great 2 to 3 day press junket in Virginia City proper, and also in Reno, and a big train ride up from Hollywood to the area and back. And people like Lucille Ball and Ronald Reagan and Hopalong Cassidy all attended, and they also invited reporters, and Beebe was one of them. So he first visited Virginia City in 1940 for that movie premiere, and and wrote about it just as he would write about any other place that he was interested in. There was no telling that this would soon become another great love of his life. I don't think it was until he came back with the love of his life, Chuck Clegg, in 1947, to research our train that we have here in Virginia City called the Virginia and Truckee Railroad. That they
which I've been on.
Good, as you should. Yeah, when you come again, we should write it again. I don't think we've written it together.
No, we haven't.
Yeah, that would be lovely. I love the Virginia and Truckee Railroad. It's fabulous. So great. But at the time that Beebe and Clegg came in 47, it was not running in Virginia City. It was still running down the hill, as we call it, so around Minden and Carson City and surrounding areas. but it had stopped service by this time. And there were rumors and very real possibilities that the Virginia and Truckee would shut down completely. And so while they were out researching for mixed train daily in 47, they became aware of this and thought, well, what can we do? How can we use our sway, as celebrity rail fans and writers and photographers? How can we help? So they thought, okay, we're going to write a history book on the Virginia and Truckee Railroad. And that's where Graham Hardy, the book publisher we mentioned earlier, comes in. He signed on to publish the book, and they did end up writing it. Unfortunately, it did not. It's still quite a fabulous book, but it did not do what they were intending to do with it, which is it didn't save the Virginia and Truckee, and it did eventually shut down in the 1950s, despite Beebe and Clegg and many other people's best efforts. But they did give it a good shot. Not only did they publish that book, but just so happens, because Virginia City seems to be connected to everything, the New York Herald Tribune, where Beebe made a national name for himself and worked for several decades, the owner of the New York Herald Tribune, his family, the Reed family, happened to own the Virginia and Truckee Railroad early on in the 1870s or 1880s, in the 1800s. So Beebe actually tried to petition his old bosses at the New York Herald Tribune to purchase or at least save their former family's legacy. But that ended up not panning out either. So they did give it a good shot. They did make the Virginia and Truckee far more well known than it was at the time. But it ended up stopping service. But then wonderful people came together many years later, such as, and specifically, the Gray family, Bob Gray. Now his son Tom Gray runs it, and the Virginia rides again. So it's pretty great. So you can run it again. But Beebe and Clegg were big proponents in saving it. So yes, he moves to Virginia City. Oh, go ahead, Karen.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to point out, for anyone who does ever get to visit Virginia City, Christmas time, November, is when it starts, the going to Santa Claus's house, workshop. And even if you don't go when they're doing these, and that's gorgeous. You get on the train at the station and it takes you out to Gold Hill. But you've got hot cocoa and there's music playing and it's all really festive and beautiful. But so far as Tom, who's really lovely, runs railroad now, they look after those trains so well, and you get on one of those, like, so much hard work goes into the running of that train line. And when you get in during the day, if you go on a train ride, seeing around Virginia City and the view of the mountains and everything, you've got to, if you ever go to Virginia City, you must get on to go and take a train ride or two. But it's, and you get a fun history when you're on during the day too. There's always someone there that'll give you a history of Virginia City itself.
Yes, absolutely.
So I interrupted there. Sorry.
Not at all. No, that is.
And there's he's out front of his house. Look at that. There he is. Beautiful.
Yeah. Love the Virginia and Truckee Railroad. That is not an interruption at all. It is absolutely a must. It's just a really cool. You get to go to places that you don't get to see by foot. But you can't. Yeah, unless you go by horseback. Yeah, and maybe we'll do a whole episode on the Virginia and Truckee history, because that's fascinating all in and of itself. Another time, just really cool railroad. So there he is, like you said, Karen, right in front of his house, and one of his Rolls Royces there.
Just one.
Yeah, one of them. He was quite the car collector. He liked to. One author says that he got a new T-Bird every other year. Him and Chuck also had Bentleys. I think there was a Spider in there. There was, well, anyway, really ritzy cars. They had quite a stable. So they're beautiful Italianate design, 1876 built home there on A Street in Virginia City. They call it John Piper's home, Piper of Piper's Opera House. That's our beautiful historic opera house theater, still used here in Virginia City. I don't believe that is the case, though Beebe and Clegg did say it was. It seems that the research is that it was not quite owned by John Piper, more like owned by John Piper's brother's widow. So a bit of a tenuous connection to Piper. But Beebe and Clegg called it John Piper's house. So if any of you have some editions of Beebe and Clegg's books that are signed, you may have one that says signed at John Piper's house. They also had in pictures of their house. I've got one here. Let's see. Here's a nice picture of their house. Let me see. I don't know. Pull over to the other side there to see if you can see. There you go. Yep. So that's the inside. That's the living room.
Hang on, I'll put it back. I'm just letting them see. Let me see if I can do this. Oh, how do I wait on? I want them to see the picture. Hang on, try that. Oh no, it's all right. I'm not very good, but yeah, that's their lounge room, yeah, or their parlor,
living room there. So yeah, you walk into a foyer, and then you turn right, and that's what this is. So they really, but the chair Beebe's seated on in that photo, they had what they call antimacassars. I hope I pronounced that right. If I didn't, Peter will be here in the comments and he'll be telling me how to say it right. But antimacassars, so those are cloth covers and doilies that go over the back of chairs. So when men did their hair back in the day, and it had oil in it, it wouldn't mess with your beautiful velvet flocked chair or whatever. So he had those made that said John Piper's house crocheted in them. So his letterhead said from John Piper's house. So he went all out on that, but it's a little dubious as to whether that was true or not. But regardless, the house looks, if you look at a picture, I don't have one here, but if you look at a picture of Beebe and Clegg's house before they got it, it was almost bare wood. The current owners have told me that they've heard that there was a horse living in the living room when they moved in. I don't know if that's true. I haven't been able to find documentation on that, but not that that's a bad thing. I mean, if Karen and I could have a horse living in our house, I think we would.
Yeah, I would.
Yeah, I could never own a bear. Yeah, I have a bear. Yeah, I could never have a cow or a horse or a pig because I'd want it in bed with me. I wouldn't be able to let it sleep outside. So, but anyway, they put a ton of money into restoring the house. Beebe was notoriously terrified of fire, so they put in a well reservoir and a fire system. They built a fireproof safe in the backyard. Chuck apparently was said to have been quite a great green thumb, so he would put in irises that are said to still be growing to this day on the property. Beebe's family owned an apple orchard up in apple country up in Washington. I think it was in Yakima, Washington state. So they have apple trees from the Beebe family orchard there that are still there today, and the wild horses come and eat the trees, or eat the apples that the trees drop. And anyway, they turned it into this beautiful, beautiful home. They also had to build, of course, a garage for their many cars to keep them out of the snow and all that. And they also installed a swimming pool. So this is my favorite part. They installed a swimming pool in the backyard. It's not currently. Uh, Not currently there today, though the pool house is, and there's a home on top of what was the pool, but it's now a different separate property. But at the time, there was apparently wild pool parties, and there's a gentleman who actually was employed by Beebe and Clegg as a teenager, who's in this Lucius Beebe fan club Facebook group that I run, and he'll chime in with awesome stories about them. So he Carl Larson's his name, and he tells a story about as a teenager, it was his job after their parties to come the next morning and fish out all the empty liquor bottles out of the pool. And while he was doing that, he would, well, I don't want to out him, but he did say it himself on Facebook, so I guess it's okay. But he said while he was doing his job, he would take a tip for himself and help himself to any unattended liquor bottles. But other kids, it was good stuff. I mean, they had good taste. It was very, very, very fine, fine champagne and gin and all the rest. So apparently, other kids I've heard. I run the oral history project at the museum that I work at here in Virginia City. So I interview a lot of people in Virginia City at the at the Fourth Word School Museum. We're doing this. So we interview people who grew up in Virginia City or made a significant impact, or their ancestors did. And so more than a few oral history interviews I've done, local kids talk about how when Beebe and Clegg were away, they were on some grand whirlwind trip of London or in Paris, or out on their private rail car, and the house was unattended. They'd hop the fence and they'd hop and go swimming in Beebe and Clegg's pool while they were unattended, because it was the only pool in the whole city. Now we have a public pool, but they were the first people to have a swimming pool in Virginia City. So that's kind of a fun fact. One girl I interviewed, bless her heart, she's wonderful. Her name's Kathy Odinsky, and she says, "I never did that. I had a key." Beebe had given her mother, their neighbor, a nearby neighbor, her mother they'd given her mother a key, and she had actually started teaching the local kids how to swim in Beebe and Clake's pool. So anyway,
I'm sure he wouldn't have minded.
yeah. Wine. He did his fair share of mischief as a kid. He didn't have much room to talk. At least they weren't blowing up his outhouse.
To those people watching, if any of you've got a question for Taylor about Beebe or Virginia City, throw it in although you've covered this really well, throw it in the chat there and we can ask her. I just thought, Taylor, I just brought up, hang on, I'm just going to hide you again, and I just wanted to show people, because you've spoken about it and I thought people might be interested. Where are we? There we go. You talked about where he got his suits in London, in Savile Street. It's still there. It's still there, and it's so very well established and famous store. And Hedda Hopper, that's Hedda Hopper. Yeah, I when I was growing up, I watched all movies. I was a movie freak. I knew who all the heads of the movie moguls, who they were, all that sort of thing. And I knew who Hedda Hopper was, and she'd often been in a lot of movies. She actually played herself in a lot of movies. But yeah, force to be reckoned with was Hedda. And the other thing I thought people might like to look at, if I can figure out how to do it, is, where did I put it? I just found this and I thought it could be kind of cute to look at. It's just a couple of seconds, because you mentioned the movie that Lucius showed up for the premiere of, with Errol Flynn and all that sort of thing. And you have told me the story of how intended to show it in Piper's Opera House, but they all got there and saw, oh crap, we can't put it on in here, it's too run down. So where did they end up showing it? Just where the Silver Queen is now, out the back of there somewhere, wasn't it?
So you know where the Silver Queen is, obviously, and then is it next door or 2 doors down? Anyway, essentially next door is what they call Grandma's Fudge. It's a candy store
and
where they hand make fudge. That was the Virginia City Theater, and so that's where they ended up having
very good. And no, that's not the one. I just want to show you. So here we go for a little bit of nostalgia. Hopefully this works. It's the trailer.
Oh yeah.
No sound. Oh, I'm doing it. Oh, what happened then? Hang on, that was no good. Wait a minute.
That's not quite all, Captain. And believe me, if ever the opportunity arises, I'll repay you for every foot of this tunnel.
I'll have to go and watch that now. I love Errol. Yes, but for those of you who do not know, Errol Flynn he was born in England, I think, and when he came to America to become a famous actor. Oh, there's the pussycat. People assumed he was Irish, and that's how he was. But he was Australian, grew up, lived in Tasmania, and left Australia to go on some adventures and ended up in Hollywood. So there you go. Yes, in like Flynn indeed. And hello, Ed. Ed, the animal.
Yeah, Ed's my old buddy from Hi, Ed.
Yeah. So I'm thinking, Taylor, if you wanted to come back and talk more about Lucius when it suits you, you can just tell. We can always do it this day, anytime, if this is a day that and a time that suits you. But you can let me know. But I just thought, oh, hello, Heather. Hello. So I thought we might end it there.
Perfect.
And then pick it up later. But there's just so many interesting. We can still chat. There's so many interesting links with Lucius and Virginia City and Hollywood, and maybe we can talk about that next time. The link, look at you, Heather. Thank you, my love. The link with Bonanza, the TV show, which you and I spoke about not long ago. For everybody, I think everyone's watching those. Bonanza. Yeah, go.
No, there's an author named. Sorry, Monette, if I pronounced your last name wrong, but I wouldn't be the first, I'm sure. But Bibbo Reinhardt, I believe. Anyway, last year she just wrote a book about Virginia City and Bonanza and their history. She would be great to get on too. Her and I have talked about the Beebe connection, and she mentions him several times throughout the book. But she would be cool to get on too. So I'll connect you with her if you're interested.
Oh, that would be awesome. Because we were talking about it. I went back and I watched the first episode of Bonanza. I think everybody watched Bonanza when they were little, yeah. But I watched the first episode, and it was all about Bonanza and how they wanted to get their hands on the land, and there was a whole group of mine magnates having a meeting right at the beginning, and it was all based on actual people of the day, and they were all talking about how much wood each mine, including the Yellow Jacket, went through each year and why they need to get their hands on Cartwright's trees. But I thought Beebe had to have had a hand in writing either the script or, as you say, being an advisor on the show to give them all the names and all the information about the mines. And so, I reckon I might start to binge watch Bonanza, and remember to give some credence to the fact that Hollywood loves to embellish things. But yeah, it was really interesting to me how much of a positive influence he was on Virginia City. And someone that Taylor knows actually remembers seeing him as a little boy. Isn't that true?
Yeah, I'm lost in living in Virginia City for a lot of reasons, but one reason is there are still people here who knew Beebe and Clegg. But I believe the person you're alluding to is really unique in that Lucius never seemed to be very fond of children. He had some choice words as to how he would refer to children. We have one local historian here who is the stepson of Graham Hardy, the publisher of Lucius Beebe's book. His name's Joe Curtis. He's another person we should get on the podcast, Karen, sometime, or on the stream here.
Oh, I love Joe.
Yeah. Let's get Joe on here too. I think he'd be a hoot also. He tells me about when he went to Beebe and Clegg's house. His parents said, you sit down, shut up, zip it. You just sit there and read your comic book and do not you just don't touch anything. There were millions of dollars worth of antiques, in there at the least. But Beebe was kind of not keen on kids. But I believe the person you're referring to is probably Peter Kramer. And it was a little different with him. Actually, Peter, you look at pictures of him as a kid, and I'm like, you were like born an adult. He just like came out as a mini adult. You just see this 3-year-old with this very serious, pensive, thoughtful, look. And so he has a totally different view of what Beebe and Clegg were like. And actually Beebe said, he told his mother, if you tell Peter, if he gets good grades and applies himself and keeps his nose clean, I'll get him into Yale. I'll stake him to Yale. So definitely had taken a different take to Beebe or to Peter than he did with most other children. Most of the kids who were
Peter was brought up by a woman who obviously instilled very good manners and into him and gentlemanly traits. So I think that given Beebe was very cheeky when he was young, I would dare say that possibly he saw something in Peter that is there.
And Peter was the only child, and so he said all of his friends were adults. It was all his parents' friends who were very interesting. Salvador Dali, although he didn't come when Peter was a kid, but still, that was like people who would come to their house, that type of people. So that's who Peter kind of grew up around. Mm-hmm. So he was he was a unique kid. But most of the people who were here today in Virginia City that grew up around Beebe and Clegg, most of them tend to remember T-Bone Towser the most. That's who they really interacted with. And they all remember him very fondly.
It's made me want to get a St. Bernard and call it T-Bone. If I ever get a St. Bernard, that's what I'm going to call it, T-Bone, in honor of Lucius.
I understand completely. Yeah.
But for the time being, I'm stuck with a snoring Rottweiler and a cheeky Chihuahua, and you've got the beautiful Leica there. Has he come back in? Has he?
No.
Is she there?
I can get her in if you want to see her.
Nah, it's all right. I'll see you next time. But yeah, I hope everybody. Bonanza was a great show. I had a crush on Joe Cartwright, right? And I was a little girl. I probably watched it when not. I know that it was on prime time here in Australia when I was a little girl, and I can't remember when it finished running. Maybe 70 or something. It went for a long time. But yeah. Oh, and if you're ever in Virginia City, I'm not sure where they've put the pictures. Taylor may have the answer to this, but I used to go to a restaurant called the Cider House, right, which was up on B Street. They've moved. The Cider House is still there, and I don't know who's in that now. Oh, yes, I do. Another little restaurant, but the Cider House itself, people. have moved into the main street. I don't know if they took the pictures with them. I think they must have, but there's photos of all of the, like, lots of movie stars, because the cider house had been there for a long time. So a lot of movie stars from back in the day, including the cast of Bonanza, would go to eat at the cider house.
Sure.
And then, but they've moved now to C Street, and I'm hoping they took those pictures with them. Maybe not. I don't know. You'll have to find out for me, Taylor. But if you ever want sorry,
go ahead.
Go. We've got a glitch.
Yeah, sorry, the delays there. No, I don't believe they did take it with them. I don't know for sure. I have been to the new restaurant that's taken over their place, but because those pictures were signed in that building, I assume
that's what I was thinking.
They're inside. I ate out.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Yeah, check it out. That actually, you're probably right, because they were signed to the owner of the lady who ran the place back in the day.
Yeah, it was called Edith Palmer's
maybe they are.
Inn.
Yeah. So, yeah. Well, anyway, someone's knocking on my door. Do they not know I'm live? Yeah. Okay. I'm getting told it's time to go.
Well, thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thanks everybody for popping in.
Yes,
and remember, if you're nearby Virginia City, go visit and say hey to everyone there I love, especially at the roasting house. My dog is crying now because it wants to go out the door. So this has been great, Taylor. We have to do it again. And yeah, I hope everybody enjoys this or rewatches it if you've missed anything. And thank you, Kevin. Thank you very much. Yes, there will be a part 2 and 4 and 5 and 6. And yeah. And yes, Taylor.
And if you're interested in learning more about Lucius Beebe, I've got a Facebook group called Lucius Beebe and the Best of Everything on Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
So feel free to just join that, free to join and chime in and let us know what you think about Beebe, or ask your questions there, or learn a little bit more about him.
Yeah, for sure. And I will put, not straight away, but I will put a link to the Facebook group for Taylor in the description. By the time anyone's rewatching this, it'll be in there. And thank you, Taylor. And thank you, everybody, for watching. And I will see you again on Friday night, American time, with Enzo. But we'll be back with Taylor as well. Thanks, Taylor.
Yeah,
it was brilliant.
Thank you.
Bye.
I don't